The day I found my grandmother's letters, I was really just looking for a gravy boat. Now, I know that sounds silly, but that's how a lot of the big moments in my life have started. Me minding my own business, digging for something ordinary, and pulling up something I was never really ready for. It was a muggy Saturday afternoon, the kind where the air in Georgia feels like warm dishwater. I'd opened every window in the house, but the curtains just hung there, too tired to flutter. I had a pot of beans bubbling on the stove. Lord knows they'd stick if I forgot about 'em, and a sink full of breakfast dishes judging me from across the room. My oldest granddaughter, Emma, was coming over the next day to help me host Sunday lunch. She's 22, full of opinions and kale, and she texted me earlier. "Grandma, can we do the nice dishes this time? I want to film a little table setting video for my socials." Now, I don't understand half of what she posts, but I do know this. When a grandchild voluntarily comes over and wants to make something pretty with you, you say yes. You say yes, and you find the dang gravy boat. Only problem was that gravy boat was buried in a box somewhere in my attic under 40 years of "I'll deal with that later." So I pulled down the attic ladder, listened to my knees complain, and climbed up into the dust. The attic smelled like old paper and forgotten summers. There were boxes labeled things like Christmas stuff, baby clothes, Sarah, and my personal favorite, Misk Junk, don't throw away exclamation points, written in my late husband Carl's messy handwriting. I spent a good 10 minutes being distracted by a tub of Halloween costumes, tiny lion suit, a plastic tiara, my old witch hat with the bent tip, before I found the box I needed. China, from Mama, it said in blue marker, the letters faded but still clear enough. I dragged it over to the bare bulb hanging from the rafters, wiped sweat from my upper lip, and cut open the brittle tape. Inside were layers of yellow newspaper, crinkling as I peeled them back. The gravy boat, white porcelain with a little blue vine painted round the rim, sat nestled beside the matching platter, just where I'd left it 10 years ago. "Gotcha," I muttered, lifting it up like I just won a prize at the fair. That should have been the end of it, but underneath the last layer of newspaper, near the corner of the box, there was something else. A stack of envelopes tied together with a strip of old lace. Now, I don't know about you, but I've always believed paper has a certain weight to it, even when it's light. Some letters feel like feathers, some feel like rocks. These, right from the moment I touched them, felt like river stones, smooth, heavy, important. There were maybe 25 envelopes, all the same kind, cream-colored, a little wrinkled from time. Each one had my grandmother's handwriting on the front, that neat slanted script I'd recognize anywhere, even though she'd been gone almost 30 years. But there were no stamps, no postmarks, and where an address should have been, each one had the same 3 words, "For my June." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. I was named after her, you know. She was June, and I was her little June bug. She died when I was in my early 30s, right in the middle of raising babies and fighting with my first husband. We never really had that grown woman talk I'd always figured we'd have one day, where I'd ask her who she'd been before she was just grandma. I stood there in the attic, dust motes drifting through the light like tiny planets, and held decades of unsent words in my hands. For my June. I took the gravy boat in one hand, the letters in the other, and climbed back down that ladder a whole lot slower than I'd gone up. Back in the kitchen, I turned the beans down low, rinsed my hands, and set the letters on the table like they were made of glass. The house was quiet except for the soft simmer of the stove and the tick of that old clock on the wall, the one that always runs 5 minutes fast because that's how my mama liked it. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee, strong enough to wake the dead, exactly how Grandma drank it, and sat down. Up close, the envelopes were even more intimate. On the back flap of the top one, in tiny letters, she'd written, "Open when you are grown." Well, I thought, looking down at my 61-year-old hands, if this ain't grown, I don't know what is. My fingers trembled a little as I slid a nail under the flap and lifted. Before I tell you what was in that first letter, I should tell you a little something about my grandmother. To the world, she was a quiet church lady who made the best coconut cake in 3 counties. She wore her hair in a neat bun, kept her house so clean you could eat off the floor, though she'd have a fit if you tried, and never raised her voice in public. But to me, as a little girl, she was magic. She had this way of listening to you like nothing else existed. When I cried over a scraped knee or a mean girl at school, she'd sit me on her floral couch, pat my leg, and say, "All right, baby, tell your grandma everything." And I would, every time. She kept peppermints in her purse, recipes in her Bible, and an entire universe of secrets behind those steady gray eyes. I used to think I knew her, but sitting there at my own kitchen table, her unsent letters spread before me, I realized I only knew the part she'd let me see. The first letter was dated May 18th, 1973. I'd have been 8 years old then. "Dear Junebug," it began. "I'm writing this in the quiet of the evening, after you and your mama went home and the house settled down to its little creaks and sighs." Her voice came back to me in those lines, soft, precise, leaving out nothing that mattered. She wrote about the way you had fallen asleep that afternoon with your head in her lap, the way you twisted your fingers in her apron string when your parents argued in the next room. "I wanted to scoop you up and run away with you," she wrote, "but a grandmother's job is different from a mother's. I am the soft place you land, child, but I cannot always catch you before you fall." Tears pricked my eyes before I made it past the second paragraph. She went on to talk about your mama, her only child, her bright, stubborn girl, and the way your daddy and her clashed like pots and pans sometimes. "I know you hear more than they think," she wrote. "I can see it in the way your shoulders tense when the voices get sharp. I just want you to know that none of it is your fault, not a stitch of it. And if I could take that worry out of your little body and carry it in my own instead, I would do it gladly." I had to stop there, just to put my head down on my folded arms and let myself cry, because I remembered that worry. It had been my constant companion, like my own shadow, but I never knew she saw it so clearly. The letters weren't long, 2, maybe 3 pages each, written on that pale blue stationery with tiny roses in the corners. At the bottom of the first one, after the part where she talked about my crooked front tooth and how I'd insisted on helping her bake biscuits, even though I mostly just played with the dough, there was a sentence that made my breath catch. "There are things about my own life I have never told you or your mama," she wrote. "Things I am not yet brave enough to say out loud, but I'm hoping that by the time you read this, I will have found a way. If I have not, well, these letters will tell you what I could not." I looked up then at the neat little stack of envelopes, each one fat with words, each one addressed to me in her careful hand. Things I am not yet brave enough to say out loud. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. I got up, opened the back door, and stepped out on the porch. The screen door creaked, that same familiar squeal it had made for years, and banged shut behind me. The sky was bruising toward evening, that soft purple gold that makes everything look a little more honest. I sat down in my old wicker chair, the one with the cushion that's lost half its fluff, and laid the letter in my lap. Who was my grandmother, really? What kind of secrets did she carry in her quiet chest while she baked pies and ironed linens and nodded along at church suppers? I wasn't sure I wanted the answers, but the letters were here now, and they had waited a long time, too long. That night, after I'd finished the dishes and turned off the TV, I took the whole bundle of letters to bed with me. I propped myself up against my pillows, turned on the lamp with the faded shade, and opened the second one. This one was dated 3 months later. "Dear Junebug," she wrote again. "Today you lost your first tooth at my kitchen table." I smiled, remembering the sticky sweetness of the watermelon I'd been eating, the shock of that little white tooth in my hand. "You were so brave, trying not to cry," she wrote, "but when you saw the blood, your lip trembled. I told you, sometimes things gotta let go so new things can grow in their place." I was talking about teeth, but I reckon I was preaching to myself, too. She went on. "Your granddaddy and I had a hard talk this morning," she wrote. "We sat at that same table, and he told me he's been offered work up north. Better pay, better hours, he says. But I am rooted here like that oak in the backyard, and the thought of packing up this life we built makes my hands shake." My eyes stung again. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and carefully folded the letter back along its creases. My own first husband's betrayal came rushing back, sharp as if it had happened yesterday instead of 20-plus years ago. The text messages I wasn't supposed to see, the strange perfume on his shirt, the way he looked at me, half angry, half guilty when I'd finally confronted him. I left. I had to. For my own sanity, for my children, for the part of me that still believed I was worth more than excuses. But my grandmother, she stayed. And somehow, sitting there in bed with her words in my hands, I didn't feel judged or shamed for my different choice. I just felt connected. She had stood at the same fork in the road and gone the other way. We'd both been brave in our own directions. As the nights went by, I read more. Some letters were sweet little snapshots. "Today you announced you were going to marry the boy who sits 2 rows over in Sunday school because his hair is shiny," she wrote in one, and I laughed out loud in the quiet of my bedroom. "You told me you loved him all the way to Pluto and back, then frowned and asked if Pluto was still a planet. I said I sure hope so." Some were deeper. "Your mama came by in tears today," she wrote in another. "She is so tired, baby. She feels like a failure, and I don't know how to tell her that the fact she worries so much about failing probably means she is not." Then came the letter that changed everything. It was about halfway down the stack, thicker than the others, pages folded neatly. The date on top made my stomach twist. August 2, 1980. 2 days after my 10th birthday. The summer my mama disappeared for 3 days without telling anyone where she'd gone. I remember that week in flashes, the heat, the way the air in our house felt like it was holding its breath, the phone ringing with neighbors asking if we'd heard anything, my daddy sitting at the kitchen table, rubbing his temples, snapping at me when I asked too many questions. They told me later Mama had just needed some time, that she'd gone to stay with a friend, that everything was fine. She came back thin and jittery like a rabbit that'd been chased too long, and we never spoke of it again. But my grandmother had, right here in this letter. "Dear Junebug," she began, "I'm writing this after putting you to bed in the little room at the end of the hall. You looked up at me with those big brown eyes and asked, 'Is Mama ever coming back?' I told you yes. I told you she loves you. Both of those things are true, but the whole truth, baby, is more complicated." My heart thumped hard enough I could feel it in my throat. She continued, "Your mama is carrying a sadness I helped put there. That is a hard thing for a woman to admit about her own child." I swallowed, the words blurring a little. "When I was a girl, younger than you are now, I fell in love with someone I was never supposed to love. His name was Daniel. He was kind and reckless and made me feel like my life could stretch beyond the limits of this tiny town. But my daddy had already promised me to another, to your granddaddy, who was steady and decent and had known me since we were knee-high." She described stolen afternoons by the river, notes pressed into her hand at revival meetings, hearts drawn in the margins of hymnals. "I got myself in trouble," she wrote plainly. "Back then, they called it being in a delicate condition. I call it being a scared 17-year-old girl who thought love would protect her from reality." I sat bolt upright. In a delicate condition. My breath came short. She went on. "My daddy told me nice girls didn't bring shame on their families. My mama cried and wouldn't look at me in the eye for a week. Daniel begged me to run away with him, said we could make it up north, start over. But I was so afraid of being poor, of being alone, of being wrong." She paused in the letter then. That's how it felt, like I could hear her pen stilling. "I married your granddaddy in the end," she wrote. "He was good to me. He took my hand at the altar and swore to love me, knowing that child wasn't his. He claimed your mama as his own the day she was born, and he never once treated her different because of it. But there was always a shadow, June, a shadow of the man I didn't choose, a shadow of what my life might have been if I'd been braver, or more foolish, depending on how you look at it." My eyes were burning so bad, I had to set the letter down and take my glasses off. My grandmother's neat handwriting swam on the page. My mama, the girl I'd grown up thinking was the product of a simple, tidy love story between my grandparents, wasn't. Your mama doesn't know, at least not the whole truth. She's always felt there was a distance I could never completely bridge, no matter how I tried. And she's right, because a part of my heart stayed back there by their riverbank where I left Daniel standing with his hands empty. She wrote about the guilt that had seeped into her like water into old wood, how she'd overcompensated trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect church lady, and how all that perfection left little room for imperfection in her daughter, and how that pressure had bent her mama into shape she wasn't meant to hold. Your mama's sadness is made of 1,000 tiny messages I gave her without saying a word. Be good, be quiet, don't want too much, don't need too much, don't you dare make the mistakes I made. I meant to protect her, but I also passed on my fear. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. It was like somebody had just turned on a light in a room I'd always walked through in the dark. So much of my mama's ways made sudden sense. The way she'd flinch at loud laughter, the way she'd freeze if my daddy tried to dance with her in the kitchen, the way she'd go quiet for days after any big decision, like she was scolding herself inside. My grandmother finished that letter with a kind of prayer. "I'm telling you this, Junebug, because I don't want our family to carry this secret until it turns to poison. Maybe by the time you read these words, I'll have found the courage to tell my mama myself. If I don't, if I fail her that way, I'm asking you, from a woman to another, to forgive me and to break this pattern. Do not let fear choose your life for you the way I did." I lay back against my pillows and stared at the ceiling, the letter still open in my hands. My grandmother had a first love, a different father for my mother, a whole other life she might have lived, and she kept it all tucked under her tongue while she made biscuits and taught Sunday school and crocheted baby blankets for the ladies at church. No wonder her eyes had always seemed a little far away sometimes, even when she was looking right at me. I didn't sleep much that night. Over the next week, I read each letter slowly, 1 or 2 a day, like sipping strong tea. Too much at once and it'd knock you sideways. They traced the whole arc of my childhood and young adulthood from her point of view. The day my parents separated for good, the first time I showed up on her doorstep with a black eye I'd blamed on a kitchen cabinet, the day I brought my newborn daughter Sarah to her house, exhausted and scared out of my mind. In one letter she wrote, "You held that baby like you were holding a glass bird. Your hands trembled so bad I thought you'd drop her. Then you looked at me and said, 'What if I mess her up, Grandma?' I wanted so badly to tell you that I had messed up your mama in ways I couldn't undo. I wanted to confess everything. Instead, I just kissed your forehead and said, 'Love her more than you afraid, baby. The rest we'll figure out. I hope someday you know how much I meant it." There was a letter from the winter my mama spent 2 weeks staying at Grandma's after yet another fight with my daddy. "She is so like me," Grandma wrote, "it scares me. She sits at this very table, twisting her ring around her finger, and asks me, 'Mama, am I allowed to want more?' I see myself at 17 hearing Daniel ask me the same thing, and I hear my daddy's voice louder than my own. I want to tell her to run, to choose herself, to break this whole thing wide open, but I'm afraid. Afraid she'll blame me later, afraid she'll suffer in ways I can't foresee. Afraid, afraid, afraid. So I say, pray on it, be patient. Lord help me, sometimes patience is just fear dressed up in Sunday clothes." I had to stop there, hand over my heart, because how many times had I said something similar to my own girls? Think it over, give it time, don't rush into anything. How many times was I offering wisdom, and how many times was I just passing on my own fear? The last letter in the bundle was dated just a few months before Grandma died. Her handwriting was shakier, the letters more crowded, like she was in a hurry. "Dear June," it began, no more bug now. "You came by today with all 3 of your children, and I watched you move around my kitchen like a dancer in a crowded stage, passing plates, kissing foreheads, breaking up squabbles with a single look. I am so proud of you, baby. You are doing it. You are mothering with your whole self, your tenderness and your anger and your weariness and your joy. You are not pretending to be perfect, and that might be the bravest thing any woman in this family has ever done." I sniffled, smiling even as tears rolled down into my ears. Then came the part that lodged in my chest like a stone. "I saw the bruise on your wrist when you reached for the tea pitcher," she wrote. "You tried to hide it with your sleeve, but I'm not blind. I never have been. I wanted to grab your face in my hands and say, 'Get out now. Do not wait as long as I did to choose yourself.' But the words stuck in my throat. 70 years of swallowing my own truth has made my tongue heavy. So I'm writing them here, hoping by some miracle they reach you anyway. If you are reading this and he is still hurting you in any way, leave. Take the babies and leave. There will be pain either way, but only one path leads you back to yourself." I laid that letter on my chest and sobbed, big wrenching sobs that shook the whole bed, because by the time I was reading it, I had left. I had done the terrifying thing and walked out of a marriage that was killing me by inches. I'd done it without knowing she'd wanted me to, without hearing her say those words. But she had said 'em. She had pushed 'em into the world with ink and paper, even if they never reached my eyes until now. And somehow it felt like she'd been with me in those dark days, standing behind me in the lawyer's office, sitting on the edge of my bed while I cried myself hoarse, whispering, "Keep going, baby. I'm here." Once I'd read all the letters, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by my grandmother's unsent love, and I faced a choice of my own. Do I keep this to myself, treat it like a conversation between me and a ghost, a comfort I tuck back into an attic box when I'm done, or do I tell my mama? Mama was 79 by then. Her memory wasn't what it used to be. Some days she misplaced entire afternoons. She lived in a little apartment across town with lace doilies on every surface and a framed photo of my daddy on the dresser, even though he'd been gone 10 years. We'd made our peace, mostly. There'd been screaming matches and cold shoulders and apologies that never quite landed where they were supposed to. But these days, she was softer with me, kinder to herself even. Would telling her the truth about her father, about the man she thought was hers and the man she never knew, would heal her, or would it crack her fragile sense of self wide open? I chewed on that question for days, carried it around like a stone in my pocket. I ended up calling my middle daughter, Lily. She's always been my straight shooter, the one who can smell emotional avoidance a mile away. "Lily," I said once we'd talked about the grandkids and her new car and the price of groceries, "I've got something I need to run by you." I told her about the letters, not every detail, not yet, but enough. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, she said, "So Grandma June was, like, pregnant before she married Grandpa?" "Looks like that," I said. "And great-grandpa pressured her into keeping it quiet, marrying someone else, pretending everything was normal." "Pretty much," I said. "And now you're wondering if you should tell Grandma," she concluded. I sighed. Yep, that's where we're at. She was quiet for a moment. I could hear the faint clatter of dishes in the background, the murmur of a TV. "Mom," she said slowly, "if you found letters like that about me, would you want someone to bring them to you or keep them a secret so you wouldn't be upset?" The question landed like a thud. I thought about it, really thought. "I'd want to know," I admitted, "even if it hurt, even if it made me question things. I'd still rather know the truth than keep living next door to it without saying hi." "Then there's your answer," she said gently. "You always told us secrets turn into mold if you keep 'em in the dark too long." I snorted. Lord, did I really say that? "More than once," she said, "and you were right." So the next Tuesday, I put the letters in a shoebox lined with a dish towel. Don't ask me why, it just felt respectful, and drove over to Mama's place. The hallway in her building smelled like boiled cabbage and pine sol. I knocked, heard her shuffling inside, and then the door opened a crack. "Who is it?" she asked, even though she could see me plain as day. "It's me, Mama, June." She brightened. "Well, come on in. I caught you before my stories. I was just about to make some tea." Her little apartment was tidy as always. Plastic covers on the couch, crocheted blankets folded just so, a calendar on the wall with doctor's appointments circled in red. I set the shoebox on the coffee table, helping her ease herself down onto the couch. "What you got there?" she asked, eyeing it. "Something from Grandma," I said. Her eyes softened at the word. "She's been on my mind this week," she murmured. "Funny how that works." I sat beside her, close enough that our shoulders touched. "Mama," I began, hands twisting in my lap, "I was going through some old things and found a bunch of letters Grandma wrote, letters addressed to me. She never mailed 'em. I read 'em." Mama nodded slowly. "She always did like to write," she said. "Her grocery lists were longer than some folks' novels. I think she wrote these for when I was older. And there's stuff in there about you, about her, about your granddaddy. Stuff I didn't know, stuff you don't think you know either." Her back stiffened just a little. "Like what?" she asked. I opened the box, pulled out the thick letter from 1980, and placed it gently in her lap. "Maybe she meant to tell you herself. Maybe she ran out of time. I don't know. But I think she wanted this story to be known, and I think you deserve to know it." Mama's hand shook as she picked up the letter. Her eyes skimmed the first lines, then slowed. I watched her face as she read, how the color drained, then rushed back, how her lips pressed together then parted, how her eyes filled but no tears fell at first. At one point, she looked up at me, eyes wide as a child. "He wasn't my daddy?" she whispered. "Granddaddy raised you," I said carefully. "He loved you, but no, not by blood. Grandma was in love with someone else first, a man named Daniel. He was your biological father." Mama stared at me like I'd said the sky was green.
"I always felt strange," she said slowly. "Like I was out of place somehow. Like Mama loved me, but she was holding something back. I used to think it was my fault, that there was something wrong with me." She looked back at the letter, eyes skimming lines I'd practically memorized by now. "She was afraid," I said softly. "Afraid and trying to protect you and protect herself and do the right thing all at once. And she messed up. She knew it. She wrote all about how sorry she was." Mama's shoulders started to shake then, the letter crumpling a little in her hands. "Oh, Mama," she sobbed, but I knew she wasn't talking to me. I put my arm around her, let her cry into my shoulder the way I had cried into hers the night my own marriage fell apart. We sat there like that for a long time, 3 generations of women packed into one small room, one in the flesh, one in spirit, one in ink and paper. When her sobs slowed to hiccups, she pulled back, dabbed at her eyes with a balled up tissue from her sleeve like she'd done my whole life. "I'm so mad at her," she said, raw, "and I miss her so much." "I know," I said. "It's a mess." She laughed, a short, jagged sound. "Well, story of our lives, huh?" "Seems to be," I agreed. Over the next few weeks, I brought more letters. Not all at once, Lord, that would have knocked her flat, but slowly, letting the truth seep in like sunlight under a door. Sometimes she'd read 'em herself, lips moving silently. Other times her eyes would get tired and she'd hand 'em back to me, say, "You read it, June. I want to hear it in your voice." We cried together, more than once. We got mad together, too. "Well, to hell with him," she said one day, slapping her thigh. Her daddy, I mean, telling her she had to hide her own child's truth to keep up appearances. Her jaw set. "No wonder she pushed me so hard to be perfect," she muttered. "She was trying to scrub me clean of her own shame." I nodded. "And you pushed me," I added gently. "Not the same way, maybe, but you did." She looked at me startled. Then she laughed through her tears. "Oh, Lord, I did, didn't I?" she said. "Stand up straight, June. Don't let folks see you fall apart, June. Don't you go making the same mistakes I made, June. I thought I was helping. Maybe I was just passing the hot potato." We both laughed at that, even as it hurt. Something happened between us in those weeks. The air shifted. We started talking not just as mother and daughter, but as 2 women who'd been handed a script and were finally questioning the lines. One afternoon, after we'd finished a letter where Grandma talked about her fear of taking up space, Mama sighed and leaned back on the couch. "You know what I wish?" she said. "What's that?" I asked. "I wish Mama had trusted me enough to tell me all this herself," she said, tapping the letter. "Not because I had a right to judge her, just because it would have meant she believed I could handle her real story." She looked at me, eyes sharp. "Don't you ever do that to your girls," she said. "Don't you ever hide the parts of yourself you're ashamed of and act like you're made of sugar and Bible verses. They need to know you're human." I smiled a little sadly. "Oh, trust me," I said. "They know."
The more we read, the more I saw how secrets ripple through a family like a stone dropped in a pond. My grandmother's fear had shaped my mother's self-doubt, which had shaped my own tendency to second-guess every choice I made. We'd all been playing out a story we didn't even know the beginning of. One evening, sitting on my own couch with the letters spread out before me, I realized something. These letters weren't just Grandma's confession. They were a map. A map of our family's wounds, sure, but also a map of our strengths. She wrote about the strong backs of the women in our line, the way we kept going even when the men in our lives floundered. She wrote about our stubbornness, our humor, our ability to make something out of nothing, a feast out of scraps, a home out of a rental, love out of broken pieces. "We are a line of women who keep showing up," she wrote in one. "Even when we're scared, even when we don't know how it'll turn out, we lace our shoes, tie back our hair, and get on with it. That's not noticing the pain less. That's choosing to carry the pain and the joy together." I thought about that line a lot, because letting these letters out into the light didn't erase the pain. It didn't magically fix my mother's decades of feeling not enough. It didn't undo my nights of doubt or my daughter's memories of slammed doors. But it did something else. It gave the pain context. It gave it roots. And once you know where something comes from, you can decide where it ends. A few months after we finished the last letter, Mama had a good day, one of those clear-headed days where she remembered names and dates like they were wrapped in neon. We were sitting at her little kitchen table, the same wobbly one she'd had since I was a teenager, playing gin rummy. The afternoon light was coming in just right, making the dust look pretty instead of just messy. Out of nowhere, she said, "You know, I think I'd like to go see that river." I blinked. "What river?" "The one Mama talked about," she said, "where she met him, that boy, your almost granddaddy." I stared. "You sure?" She shrugged, but her eyes were bright. "I spent all my life living next to a story I didn't know," she said. "I got enough pieces now to picture it. Might as well see the place where it started." So we went. It wasn't a big river, more of a wide creek, really, running behind what used to be farmland and was now a bunch of overpriced houses with decks and kayaks. We parked off the side of the road where the shoulder turned to dirt and walked down the slope, me holding Mama's elbow with one hand and my heart with the other. The water was low that day, sliding slow over smooth stones. We found a flat rock near the bank and sat down, careful and creaky. Mama looked around, taking it all in. "She was just a girl," she said quietly. "Can you imagine? Sitting here was a boy she loved and being told she had to pretend it never happened." I thought of my own teenage self, sneaking kisses behind the bleachers, thinking the world would end if my mama found out. We'd all been girls by some river, in some way or another. Mama reached down, picked up a small stone, turned it over in her fingers. "I'm mad at her," she said again, "but I'm also mad at him, at her daddy, at all the folks who made her think silence was the only safe choice." Her jaw set. She tossed the stone into the water. We watched the ripples spread, then settle. "Do you want to look for him?" I asked hesitantly. "Daniel, I mean, or his people? You might have cousins out there somewhere." Mama shook her head, surprising me. "No," she said, "I got enough family to keep up with as it is." She patted my hand. "I don't need more people to love, baby. I just needed to know the truth about the ones I already had." On the drive home, she was quiet for a long time. I kept glancing over, watching the way the light moved across her face. Finally, she said, "You know what the worst part is? "What?" I asked. "I spent all my life trying to be the kind of daughter Mama wanted, and all that time what she really wanted was to be the kind of woman she never got to be." She shook her head, chuckling sadly. "It's like we were in the same house speaking different languages," she said. "I was begging her to see me, and she was begging me to forgive something she'd never told me she'd done." There was nothing to say to that but the truth. "We did our best with what we knew," I said, "and now we know more." She nodded slowly. "And now we know more," she repeated. Months turned into a year. Mama's memory kept slipping. Some days she'd ask me the same question 5 times in 10 minutes, but there was a lightness in her that hadn't been there before. One day, sitting on a couch while Wheel of Fortune played too loud in the background, she squeezed my hand and said, "You know, I used to be so afraid of turning into my mother. Now I just hope I get to see her again and tell her I understand." I squeezed back. "I hope she gets to see you and tell you she's sorry," I replied. She smiled a little. "I think she's been trying," she said, nodding toward the shoebox of letters on the shelf. After Mama passed, peacefully in her sleep, which is more than some folks get, I found myself back in my own kitchen, the letters spread out once again. My daughters came over, bringing casseroles and paper plates like we do in the South, using food as a language when words are too tender. They'd known pieces of the story by then from the conversations Mama and I had had in front of them, but they hadn't read the letters. We sat around my table, me, Sarah, Lily, and Emma, 4 women, 4 generations, the late afternoon light slatting across the wood. "Do you want to hear her voice?" I asked them, running my fingers over the top page. They all nodded, so I read. I read about the lost teeth and the arguments and the riverbank romance. I read about fear and choice and regret. I read about the bruise on my wrist and the prayer that I'd leave. They listened, eyes shiny, hands wrapped around their mugs. At one point, Emma wiped her cheek and said, "She sounds like you." I laughed softly. "Baby, she sounds like all of us," I said. "Different details, same hearts." When I finished, there was a quiet that didn't feel empty. Sarah, my oldest, spoke first. "It's kind of like we've all been living in a house with a locked room," she said slowly. "We felt the draft under the door, heard noises sometimes, but nobody would say what was in there. Now we opened it and, yeah, it's messy, but it's just a room." Lily nodded. "And now we can decide what we want to keep from it and what we want to throw out. We don't have to live in the dark anymore." Emma, who's always been big on symbolism, smiled through her tears. "I want to make a video about this," she said. "Not the details, that's ours, but about letters and secrets and grandmas. I want other girls to know they don't have to be scared of their family stories." I looked at her, at all of them, and my chest filled up so full it ached. Grandma's unsent letters had done something she hadn't dared hope they'd do. They turned our family house from a place of whispered fears and unspoken questions into a place where doors could be opened, lights switched on, windows cracked for fresh air. Sometimes now, when I'm alone in the evenings and the house is creaking its old familiar creaks, I'll pull out one of her letters and read just a paragraph or 2. I can hear her in the rustle of the paper, see her in the tilt of the handwriting. I realize something new every time, like the way she always signed off. "With all the love I know how to give, your Grandma June." All the love I know how to give. Not all the love you deserve. Not all the love there is. All the love I know how to give. That line used to break my heart. Now it heals it, because that's all any of us can do, really. We love with the tools we've been handed, with the stories we've been told. If we're lucky, we learn new tools. If we're brave, we tell new stories. Grandma wrote her letters but never mailed them. Fear kept them in a box for decades, but she still wrote them. She still pushed the truth out of her chest and onto the page. She did the best she knew how to do at the time. And in the end, even years after she was gone, those unsent letters found their way into the hands that needed them most. When I think about my family now, I picture a house. Not a fancy one, just a modest southern place with scuffed floors, a sagging front step, and a porch swing that squeaks if you go too high. The kind of house that's held more laughter than it has paint jobs, more arguments than it has matching chairs. For a long time, that house had rooms we didn't go into, a door at the end of the hall that stayed shut, a closet nobody opened. We walked around them, learned to ignore the drafts, told ourselves that was just how the house was. My grandmother's unsent letters were like a set of old keys we didn't know we had. One afternoon, digging for a gravy boat, I found them at the bottom of a dusty box, and slowly, nervously, with my heart hammering like a fist on wood, I started trying those keys in the locked doors. None of what I found inside was tidy. Secrets never fold themselves into perfect stacks. There were dusty regrets, tangled loyalties, love letters to people who never got them, and choices made by a scared 17-year-old girl that rippled through 3 generations. But as we aired those rooms out, me, my mama, my girls, the house itself didn't crumble. It settled. It breathed. We learned that knowing the cracks in our walls didn't make the house unlivable. It just told us where to shore things up, where to add a beam, where to stop leaning so hard. Now when I walk through the rooms of my life, I don't flinch at closed doors. I know they can be opened, and if I feel a draft, I go look for the gap instead of pretending it's not there. We are still that same imperfect family under the same imperfect roof, but the light comes in different now, spilling down hallways that used to stay in shadow. And every time I see my granddaughter scribbling her own thoughts in a journal, not hiding them for 50 years, I think, this is how the house gets stronger. Not by erasing the old blueprints, but by understanding them and then choosing with a steady hand what we'll build next.